find the balance between everything. So I think maybe take, because I know we wanted to talk about open space, because that was I know you guys, we were working on definitions for open space. So if we focus on there, then we can,
Yes,
piggyback.
okay, it's fixed.
Okay.
So I think somebody messed with dials this morning.
That's what I heard, is everybody turned like everything off.
Great. So I need to make sure everybody knows, don't touch anything. We gotta figure something out, but
Do this so they can't see. There we go. Okay, so now we have audio back. Sorry.
All right. So are we in Zoom or YouTube? What are we doing?
Both.
yes.
Oh, we're doing both. Okay.
So
we
we are-
could actually,
Yeah, that's why you have Q&A, so people can put in questions into the Q&A. Absolutely. It was just they weren't hearing us.
okay.
That's why we're still doing Zoom, so we can make sure we can communicate back and forth. And then again, also like if something happened and Nancy needed to pop into Zoom, she could do that. And we're also live streaming on YouTube. So if you just want to watch the meeting, you just go over to the YouTube channel and watch the meeting.
Eventually the Zoom will dry up.
Potentially. We're, again, still working on many different ways to make sure that we provide as much opportunity for public interaction as possible.
So I'm going to rehash a couple of the things that I said now that we have audio and we feel confident that we have audio.
Yes.
My hope was that we would see several city council members on here, and I see that there are two. I can't see who the third name is.
It's just a member of the public.
Okay.
I believe the name was Joe Nunn.
Okay.
Is what showed up
They're
in.
not just a member of the public, but they have.
Well,
Okay.
they're
But
not
sure.
an elected member.
Okay. My hope was, and it sounds like I may not be able to do this, my hope was to check in with the city council members now that you've had a chance to go through reviewing the first project subject to the AX-RES ordinance. And I just wanted to sort of see if there was a way that we could, list out issues, problems, frustrations with things that you all had so that we could make sure and attend to those in whatever modifications we make. I guess most of the discussion that we've had so far has been trying to understand the relationship between the Major Subdivision Committee and this committee and what we're doing. And we are much more specific, but at some level, much of what at least I've had in mind, the kinds of things that we need to be considering are also on the mind of the Major Subdivision Group. And so we need to find a way to coordinate. Perhaps we'll have a joint meeting. I'm open to any way that we move forward. The last thing I want to see is we go down some path and it's way out on one side and the Major Subdivision Group goes another path and there's no way to reconcile them. It needs to be clear for everybody.
Yeah,
The city
I
council.
won't let you do that.
Okay.
That's why I mentioned the subdivision subcommittee, because it's like I want to make sure, because I don't want anybody feeling like, oh, we've gone off on this. And no, I want to make sure they work together.
But like I said when we were in the dark a few minutes ago, the experience that I went through, the work that what's the intern's name?
Christine?
Christine said she's been watching all the sea level rise committee meetings. We spent a lot of time hashing through things in that sea level rise committee, and now it's all just been put on hold. Who knows what will happen with it? The last thing I want to see us do is the same thing.
Yeah.
I want to try to get a decent dialogue going, and when we've got two people, I don't think we're getting a dialogue going. I want there to be a better way that we can get feedback and get a process going. And what we were talking a little bit about before is, based on the experience that I felt we had with the sea level rise process, I'm feeling like before we drop some new model ordinance, some new modified ordinance on, we should do a much better job of documenting the problems that we're trying to address with this modification.
So I think I have a couple of suggestions, because one, a lot of the concerns with the other ordinance was public participation. And we do as much as we can to encourage public participation. But but sometimes you don't hear it until you get to a public hearing. You know, no fault of us, it's just sometimes that's the way things pop onto people's radar is when something comes to public hearing. But council actually asked this group to look at, okay, what's going on with the annexation zones? What do you think? Because they've already recognized they think there might be some changes necessary. So it's like they put it to you guys, didn't give you any specifics. It was just take a look and come up with ideas. And I think what we can do is once we get a little bit farther and you guys come up with some suggestions before it gets to ordinance form, what you could do is, of course, you report to the planning commission, but maybe also ask to like, hey, make a report to council before you put it into an ordinance form to see, you know, and I don't know if that gets us into any issues. It's like, okay, this is what we're thinking, you know, this is what we're looking at, you know, and before we put it into an ordinance, and then the public's more aware of it, and then you can go, you know, it's like, hey, by the way, there's the next meeting. So if you've got questions, submit comments to Janelle or, you know, online and show up a meeting so we can get more of that dialogue going. And I think that then gets it, you know, a little bit more open, and then you kind of get an idea of where the public's feeling.
Right. I mean, what I'm looking for here is more of a continuous improvement process with fewer hard steps. I'd like there to be an ongoing dialogue going on rather than a couple of hard, you know, sharp changes in the level of information, because that seems to be the thing that ends up disrupting everything, and everybody gets kind of crazy. And this is important stuff.
I think another possibility is that we have a preliminary presentation to the Planning Commission, because we do get good public participation at the Planning Commission meetings. You know, and if that's a special topic, then I think we would get public input.
Yeah, and it's like sometimes we can't always take public comment during a meeting, but if like we can go, okay, there's the next upcoming meeting, you can submit written comments, you know, please come to a meeting so we can, you know, if people are interested, then we're trying to engage a little bit better up front. And I think there's a bunch of different options that we can do, and I think some of the ideas that we've been talking about.
Right, I mean, I think we're all, you know, just like the way this meeting started, we're all in transition. We keep changing the way we're doing business. I've become very used to the chat room and what we get in real time from the chat room, and it sounds like maybe we've got a little of that possibility today, but ultimately that may disappear, and we may have more of a behind the scenes commenting, question raising kind of thing going on.
Well, again, all public comments get posted to the website, so everything gets there's no behind the scenes, because I just want to, when somebody says behind the scenes, they think we're doing something that's not in public, and
Sorry.
that's not true.
What I mean by that is there isn't a continuous dialogue. There's a back and forth.
Yes.
With time intervals in between.
Right, and again, we're trying to figure out what best works for everybody, and you know, we're hit and miss. Like today, I can tell you last week this all worked fine, and then today it was like, we don't like you. So we're gonna find our path forward and a comfort level as we continue moving forward.
So you talked about the fact that the major subdivision group is developing standards, and I think we've been, at least in my mind, I don't know that we've ever used that word, but I kind of feel like we've been imagining the development of standards. What specifically?
At least stronger language.
Yes.
Right.
In the regs.
Well,
and more definitive language.
And just so everybody's understanding, we're talking about the cluster subdivision ordinance, because that's where the options are for a number of the annexations. Because when we talked about the annexation zones, you seemed okay, and again, we can always revisit it, you know, the types of units. You guys seemed okay with the types of units, but what you wanted to see was require a mixture of the units, so you don't get all duplexes or all the townhouses. You have to do a mixture of those units, is what I took out of the multiple meetings. And then it's like, then we wanted to get, okay, how do we encourage or require, you know, the extra landscaping, the houses fronting on the roads, or maybe the use of alleys, or, we want to strongly encourage or somehow require front porches so it gets that neighborhood feel. That's what I was taking out of it, kind of a more traditional neighborhood design. And then lately we've been focusing on, okay, open space. We were working on a definitions of open space because we have an open area in the ordinance. And then we were looking at a passive and an active. And what I'd done some research, and Nancy had provided some research, is you don't call it passive and active. We have a definition of open space, and then we have like community open space, which could be, you know, your pool or your pickleball courts or your walking paths, and then you had more of a natural open space that is more of where you find your stormwater management ponds and your grassy areas and your landscape buffers, but that doesn't prohibit you from like using it somehow. I was like, you know, like a great area for a dog park or something that's a little bit less, you know, I want to use the word active. And I know that's where we've been looking at most recently.
One of the things that I think I've been pretty consistent on from the very beginning is, what you just said, I think did a really good job of summing up where we've been. But the piece that I still feel really that must be a part of this is the arrangement of all those things. Because I think without something, and this is why I bring up standards, without something that helps to guide what I would call clustering, which means you don't have an even use of all the space for whatever uses you have. If you've got a bunch of residential lots, those residential lots don't spread themselves out. The word in geography is tessellate. They don't spread out evenly all over the landscape. The idea of clustering should be that we're actually keeping some piece of intact, significant open space and then allowing a tighter use of the space in some other part of the
So, and now that it's
property.
been approved, that's to a degree what Lewis Waterfront Preserve was attempting to do. Because they put all of their housing over on one side and they left the other side of the property open space. Now again, that technically is a cluster. They didn't have like the hots going everywhere. They left a good large portion of, and again, I'm just using it as an example, not maybe the best example, but an example of something we've seen more recently, as they left a good chunk of open space to the east and to the south, and they pushed all the houses over to the one side.
Technically, yeah.
Yes,
That's
so
cluster.
technically, yes.
If you look at a blank sheet of paper, that's what you get.
But, is it, I'm going to quote Gertrude Stein, is there a there?
Right, and
There
again,
is not.
and again, I was just using that as example as they did actually cluster, but what we want is more than that. We want to from what I've been hearing is we want a mixture of housing types. We want additional items. So, and we've been discussing, I'm like, okay, what do we put into that? Because right now we just adopted, the wetlands buffer ordinance. So now you have to have a buffer from that. We don't have in an ordinance, but what we can do in the cluster ordinance is, okay, you have to save the trees or a portion of the trees, or, in the cluster subdivision, you need to do X, Y, and Z. And as we've talked about, it's also that, it's the annexation zone. So we want people to annex. So what do we give them? What kind of carrot do we use to get them while still ensuring that we get what the standard and the quality that we're looking for, so it feels like the city of Lewis. And I know we've been doing a lot of that, back and forth, and doing like pattern books and like putting into the code ideas of what should be there.
So I don't, this is just my perspective. The order of operations, the way I see this, is we should start with imagining how we can modify the ordinances to create the scheme that we're looking for. And after we figured that out. Then we figure out how to work the incentives. I really feel very strongly that we don't want to start with the incentives, because I think maybe it's just me and it's just the way I think, but I kind of want to see how far we can go with pushing this. And I think also, I would imagine that there's an opportunity for what we do, particularly in arranging space and open space. It may help the major subdivision open space conversation, the development of standards and so on. I mean, I think personally, and you know, I don't, how long have I been on the Planning Commission? It's a couple of years now. I hear what you're saying about this project, and yes, they shoved everything over, but that's if you're looking at a blank piece of paper that doesn't describe anything about the landscape. If you factor in nothing more than the wetlands, you immediately are shifted over to the half of the property that wasn't wetland. And then you look at that parcel, and it pretty well tessellated. It pretty well exhausted the space over there, as I was saying earlier. Yes, there's a stormwater pond, but other than that, it basically is a pile of parcels evenly spaced among them with streets connecting them all. And, you know, the traditional neighborhood design, some of the conservation subdivision work that I know you're familiar with, Melanie, those would they would knock out those environmental constraints, the environmental challenges, and then they would further arrange the furniture, if you will, so that there were still pieces of open space in the non-wetland area, you know, forested areas or whatever they might be, so that if you look from the sky, you wouldn't see an even distribution of parcels. And if that means you've got to have multiple kinds of units of varying, you know, specifications, great. But the point I'm trying to make is we should be, and maybe we need to make some graphics, because we're just talking. I feel like I'm just waving my arms right now, but maybe we need to have some simple diagrams that explain the difference. You know, you can, from Randall Arndt, I mean, you can take the AR1 or you know, the R2 or R1, whatever, and exhaust that space, you know, evenly spread all those things around. You can take all those houses and reduce the sizes of the lots and put them all in a quarter of the land. It reduces the number of square feet of pavement. It reduces the number of linear feet of road and pipes and wires and everything else. Those, I would think, would be incentives
So
right there.
in the code, it says homes are to be clustered on in the environmentally suitable portions of the tract, specifically those portions of the tract least encumbered by sensitive environmental features. So maybe we need to expand on that. It's like, okay, well, one, now we already have a wetlands buffer. So, okay, you're not touching the wetlands. They're staying in open space, and we have a 50-foot buffer from them. You know, so I think we've got that covered. I think that helps protect, so you're clustering further away from them. If there's woodlands on the site or floodplain on the site, you know, how do we encourage, or just say, don't build in those areas, or you have to, because I know we get a lot of like, well, people are taking the trees down. I understand that there's nothing in code that requires trees. There's nothing that in the code says if I have, you know, an acre of trees on my property, I can take them all down because the code doesn't prohibit that. But if maybe in the cluster subdivision it says, okay, if you have a wooded area, maybe you can only clear a certain percentage of it, you know, so then you're protecting that environmental feature, you know, and then you're moving the houses away from that, and you're putting that ends up becoming your open space.
Will such a consideration be a part of the major subdivision thing? Because I think I would suggest everything you just said about trees and trying to keep trees around should also be in the major subdivision. I don't think it should just apply to annexation.
Again, we're going to focus on annexation, and then we're going to steal from here and take it over there and take over there from over to here. They haven't gotten there yet.
Okay.
They haven't gotten there yet. We're looking at like, okay, what are the current standards for landscaping? And it's like, provide street trees. And it's like, okay, what other standards should there be for landscaping? And what are then some guidelines that you need that, you know, maybe make sense for, you know, different properties that then you could put a condition. on to the subdivision, going, okay, you meet all these standards, but we like this guideline over here makes sense for this property, so I'm going to condition that guideline for this development. So we're taking a different look at the subdivision. But I think some of the other items we've looked at are, we got into the architectural of the, when we were last discussing it, it was like, you can reduce the setbacks to be a front yard setback of 10 feet. But we said, okay, but if you're doing that, you got to provide at least one tree for every 2,000 square feet of land, which are not street trees. You're planting more trees on the property. We talked about lot averaging, which I think would help with the clustering that we approved in the R2, is allowing that to happen in the cluster subdivision, which gets you that odd, same number kind of lots, but your kind of lot sizes are changing a little bit. 3 types of architectural buildings, so styles, so it's not the same house. I know, and I'm just going through the notes that I had taken. Encouraging rear-loaded house designs, and the garage is in the rear. And if the garage is going to be in the front, the garage had to be set back from the facade of the house. We put a minimum on the driveway and the curb cuts, so it couldn't be more than 11 feet in width, which right now is 20 feet, so you're shrinking. So, you'd have to park behind each other. We talked about reducing the number of off-street parking spaces with some type of incentive, and then requiring like bicycle parking. These are the things I had written down that we were going to require for items to kind of get to some of that more traditional neighborhood design. And then when we're talking about open space, I know the code currently says it has to be on one contiguous land parcel, but I think what we'd been discussing is, well, how do we get pocket parks? Like, one contiguous parcel of land is nice, but I think
I don't know where that came from, but it's.
Well, but you can calculate.
I've seen that stolen from other codes, is like, and I've seen it where that if you have one big parcel of land, it has to equal like so much percentage of your open space, so you get a large open space land. So you don't get a strip that's just like 10 feet wide by 200 feet long, which, that's your landscape buffer, but other than that, it's not really usable open space. So what I had put down in my notes is that required open space should be located throughout the development, and pocket parks are encouraged. And that if you want, like if we require, like in certain clusters, subdivisions, 50% of the lot has to be open space, but maybe like 20% of that has to be one large parcel. And then so you get your larger parcel of open space, and then you also can encourage those pocket parks.
So I think.
Am I helping getting us back to where you guys want?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think for me, because I'm a spatial thinker, we may need to work up some examples that we can examine. Like what, if I looked at the code, if we start to draw this out, how might somebody interpret the code, and what might they end up doing? Because at least I'm still learning my way between what I'm imagining in my mind, what we put in words that has legal meaning, and what a landscape designer or an engineer decides to lay out as a plat plan with, subject to all those conditions. Those may all be different from each other.
Right.
And I want to factor in another piece of everything that I think you just discussed is we talk about preserving scenic views. And to me, that's a piece of this, right? I think this is what gets, at least my theory is, when you get a bunch of people in the room at a public hearing angry about something or worried about something coming up, the specter or the prospect of a big change in the landscape, everybody's been used to seeing that land that way. Maybe there's a portion of that land that they still could imagine being an open space. And so, then there's this whole, before I moved down to Lewis, I lived in southern Chester County. And in southern Chester County, there was land conservation organization called the Brandywine Conservancy. They did a whole scenic viewshed analysis of the entire area that they were interested in working on, to the point where they had house sites set up on these large parcels of land. And they were chosen because they were less visible to all the rest of the neighborhood. Now, that's an extreme. I'm not saying we can do that here. But I think there's a way that we could pay more attention to scenic vistas. We've got this program that we relate to, which is the Byways program. You know, people want to be able to drive along, ride along these corridors that work through Lewis. I guess my hope is that we would still have some sense of open space along those corridors.
And I think the
And we
good
haven't
thing,
necessarily specified that. It's not reflected in the code, and it's not reflected in anything that you just said. And so I want to find a way to get to,
so maybe so the good thing is the byways. We've got the historic Lewis Byway, and they've done a corridor management plan for Kings Highway, and I know they've been working on one for New Road about designing because especially for New Road, they'd had the conversation, New Road doesn't look like the same the entire length, because they were looking at the county portion and the city portion, and it's like, how do we preserve this area to make sure it looks like this? And we're recognizing, when you get down to New Road at Pilot Town, that doesn't look like anything down, closer to Nassau. So, figuring out what makes sense where. And they do review the plans, which is good. They have an entire subcommittee for landscaping, so they look at that. And I think what we can do is look at corridor buffers, and I know it's in the subdivision code, because somebody actually, because they're on a byway, they're providing an open space portion along that road. But we can definitely look at that and, something like, if you're along, in the byways or certain other roads, that, maybe there's a buffer required between I just want to call it, we're just going to use New Road, and then you have open space to preserve that corridor. So I know the houses then wouldn't front on New Road, but there's so much of a buffer that the trees then would cover the back of the house, so then the houses would face front on that road, because you're preserving that corridor at that point. So it doesn't look like you've got houses there, because you're providing, 20, 30, 40, 50 feet between the edge of the road and where you get to, the house lot.
Well, one of the
And that's
most effective rules that I ever encountered relative to scenic byways was a requirement to maintain the hedgerow along the road.
meaning rather than what?
Rather than clearing everything to the road, which is what they're doing now.
What they're doing on New Road.
On the new subdivision,
Yeah.
you have to maintain that hedgerow
Right.
in place. I mean, yes, at your entrance, you probably have to do something because you have to do an accel decel lane. But other than that, you've got to maintain the hedgerow, which does a lot better job of maintaining the scenic quality of the road than putting in new landscaping.
Taking mature plantings that have been there for perhaps decades,
Yes.
rather than planting
And
little
might
whips.
be messy and,
Well, and
know.
there's where you clear out the shrub items and, if they've got ivy, you clean it up. Because sometimes you
Maybe.
get,
Yeah.
sometimes.
depends on what's in there. I mean, if it's an invasive, yeah, but
yeah.
if it's native stuff, you leave it. If it's messy, that's okay. That's part of what New
Makes it-
Road is.
And I think that's a conversation. I know the byways they've had that with the engineer. I know with some of the projects, that's not what got worked out, just based on how it was negotiated. But I think there's definitely things we can look at. I think there's items we can put into the code for the cluster. It's like, okay, well, if we want to preserve how that looks and how it functions, but also realizing at some point they're going to have to tear some of that up to get utilities down the road, which kind of then impacts, can I save this tree and can I not? And I think it's, okay, maybe I can't save all the mature trees, but we're going to, okay, you're going to have to preserve some of them and clearly explain why you can't preserve them, because if you have to run utility lines, say down New York Road or Kings Highway, that's the first thing that gets torn out because that's where the utilities have to go, unfortunately. But it's like, how do we encourage them? And also, at some point, you don't want trees right on top of utilities because then the roots get into utilities, and then we have BPW has a complete other mess on their hand. But how do we encourage?
But but what you're talking about here is exactly what I have in mind. If you have an entire road frontage as along any of the properties along New Road, there's a big long frontage. If you don't have every linear foot of that road frontage, when you look to the right or to the left, you see houses the whole length of that road frontage. There may be trees, there may be berms, there may be all these things, but if the general sense you get is that where there once was open space, there now is a line of houses, I would argue, for just the reasons you said, we need to find a way of clumping them. We need to find a way of breaking up so that there's still space. My wife is a gardener. She talks about, even in a busy garden full of all sorts of fancy plants, you need to have places where the eye can rest, patches of grass. You're a landscape designer. I mean, you can't have all one thing and expect it to be easy to see. That's kind of what I'm looking for is not only variety in the sizes of the units, the configurations of the units, but also the layout, so that even take the environmental constraints out, the wetlands, the floodplains, all of that, but then how can you further configure that so that you take all the houses that we would typically spread evenly. We're going to be talking about something coming up very soon where the space has been exhausted. How do we break ourselves from that and get to a point where we're incentivizing the use of smaller lots so that large contiguous pieces can be used? It's not enough, in my opinion, that you have a contiguous parcel that you can calculate with a GIS that looks like spaghetti when it draws on a map. It's basically all the way around the perimeter of every parcel.
Right, and
it all is one parcel that can be mapped as one polygon in a GIS. That's not what we should be shooting for.
No, that's why we were looking at tweaking that one because it's like, that's what you don't want. What we want is those pocket parks, maybe one larger parcel, and recognizing that, if we need a buffer, because we'll have subdivisions and they have a buffer requirement, so they buffer from each other. That might be a little bit narrower, and that could count towards the overall, but we want to encourage open space kind of broken out and throughout so everybody has easy access. I see we have a couple extra questions, so I'm going to check those.
Super. So in the game of standards, so here we go. What do we have? Not a question, but a statement. There's no, okay.
Existing hedgerows are where deer hide and jump out in front of oncoming cars. It is a lot safer to have clear views for drivers to see oncoming. Oh, it's Joe. Okay. Joe Nunn is Joe Hockner.
All right.
So he's playing with his name today. And I think those are all things we need to consider. Is, do we want a hedgerow, or do we want to keep the hedgerow, or do we want to encourage lots of different native plantings? And I think that's a lot of things, and then also, what do we want that represents Lewis, but then also, how do we encourage people to annex so we can encourage it to be Lewis?
So to Joe's comment, I guess I'd say cars and people in cars are one piece of the puzzle. We shouldn't configure the landscape so that it's the safest just for the people driving down the road at 35 miles an hour. I think we need to make it something that's pleasant to walk through, something to ride a bike through. But
the good thing is a lot of our main roads, Delta requires a multimodal path or a sidewalk. So we're encouraging the walking and the biking, which I think is wonderful. That encourages, gets us out of our cars.
So particularly in the annexation areas, I think there's a particular challenge with what I'm about to say. But in in my brief experience with planning, by the nature of the way a proposal comes to us, we're looking at a property, we're looking at a, piece of ground and what is going to be configured there. But rarely do we connect that piece of ground to its immediate neighbors. So, we don't necessarily connect the streets. We don't necessarily connect the trails. And it seems to me we should put some higher value on building a system of trails, building a system of spaces that exist beyond any one parcel. It fits into a bigger fabric.
Yes, because I know, I'm going to admit I didn't read all of our items that we talked about, but we definitely talked about ensuring interconnectivity, especially with the main roads. Sometimes it'll be a road to nowhere for a while, but I think we all agree you want that road to connect, so you keep them off the main road. It's actually safer, it's better for traffic, keeps traffic flowing, so not everybody's going out at one point, you can kind of go back and forth. We've discussed about the paths and, dedicating to city parks and the trails, and that's where I've, in my past history, run into a little bit more problem, but I think because it's the HOA owns the open space and is responsible for the maintenance of that, then how do we then go, okay, well, you've got a sidewalk or a trail that dead ends with this road, we want you to connect through. I think we can do that. We just need to encourage that and put that into the code, and just make sure everybody's aware. It's like, hey,
well, let's talk about that.
Everybody gets to use it.
Let's talk about that for a second. I mean, every subdivision that I've seen come through, we're going to talk about one tonight where all the plans show those sections of roads that will be maintained by the city, those sections of roads that will be maintained by I'm assuming the HOA. Maybe there's a way to have more of that maintenance managed by the city, particularly with the trails, that it wouldn't just be the HOA that would have the responsibility.
Maybe we require an easement be put on the trail system that allows the public to use it, and perhaps the city does participate in the maintenance.
I think that's definitely a conversation we definitely need to have with Parks and Rec.
Right.
Because make sure they're comfortable with taking it on, because that technically falls into their jurisdiction. I have no problem adding it. I think great idea.
Okay.
Trying it. I just want to get it out there, and then when I go back and listen to it, then I put it out there.
This is a small enough place. We should be able to understand it as a whole rather than just as a bunch of little islands that have basically walls between them. There should be a transition from one parcel to the next, one subdivision to the next. In fact, I guess if I had my way, when you look back on it years later, you wouldn't be able to tell where one ended and the next began. I realize that's asking a lot, but it's, again, a goal.
No.
So how do we get to the point of developing standards, things that can actually guide and work rather than just be a wish list of things that end up not really happening? I can imagine with the way we're talking, we could end up having a laundry list of things, and then when the plan comes in, it's like, well, we decided we didn't want to do that, and well, we didn't really think we needed to do that. Here's what you got. So So a lot of the stuff I was reading, those would be criteria we'd put in the cluster subdivision code, the cluster ordinance code as requirements. And then similar to what the subdivision code is looking at, so when they're talking about streets, these are the street requirements, these are the standards, and then, hey, these could be guidelines. Now, I don't expect there to be a lot of guidelines for streets because you build them one way, but if these are options, maybe like porous pavement, encouraging porous pavement or something like that. And we could do that here. It's like, okay, here are criteria, here are standards, and then here are some guidelines that we think would be good. And maybe they don't always, because what if somebody doesn't have floodplain or doesn't have any woods on their property? Well, they can't
can't protect that, but is there something else we can protect? And, you know, to get them to encourage to do that. But again, it's finding, I know I've said this in the past, like finding that balance of what are we asking for, and when at one point does it become just easier to go to the county and develop? Because that's what we're trying to avoid. We want to encourage development in this city, but we want it to feel like Lewis and look like Lewis. So how do we find that balance? And I think what we also need to understand is the farther we get out from the city, it's not going to look like 4th Street, you know? And I don't think it should, but that's my perspective. But should it look something like it fits, like it could fit with 4th Street? Absolutely.
Right.
You know, because I don't think we'll.
But that landscape out there right now doesn't look like 4th Street. And, you know, the nice thing would be to, I don't have this all worked out. There would be pockets of, if you want 4th Street, intermixed with open space. You know, something where you have that sense of neighborhood, you have the kinds of things that you presented, Melanie, with the traditional neighborhood design, but that there are also these open areas. I really want to see that. Now, that's just me. Maybe the council doesn't feel that way. They won't want that.
And I keep telling, like, because my vision is different from your vision, different from Melanie's vision, different from Nancy's vision, different from, so because everybody sees something slightly differently. So I might not get everything I want, you guys might not get everything you want, but we come to an agreement like this makes sense. And I think,
but I think just watching all of the citizens get up and speak in public hearings, a lot of them are concerned about a loss of a sense of open space. And I think that's why I'm focused so much on this issue, because ultimately the arrangement is what generates that sense of open space. You know, what you see from 2,000 feet in the air or 10,000 feet from the air isn't something that's going to be very apparent to many people unless they happen to pilot an airplane. Most people are going to see it from the ground. And so although you can calculate open space as exceeding whatever requirement we have, what ultimately matters is that you can see here and see that there's green all the way through the parcel. And that here you've got buildings, but you don't have buildings the whole way, and only if you look at this from this one direction would you see anything other than buildings. It's a matter of vistas and maybe orientation of vistas. I don't know. Crazy ideas, but looking at the body of comments that people share, if it isn't some sort of a water issue, a lot of people seem to be worried about these visual things.
absolutely. And it's like, how do we find the balance? Because the property's going to develop, especially if it's going to be in an annexation zone, it's going to develop. So how do we find that balance of encouraging them to annex into the city instead of developing in the county, and then without, you know, it's finding that balance, which I think sometimes can be easy, sometimes is going to be difficult. And not everybody's going to be happy because, again, everybody has a different vision in their head. Yeah. And it's trying to get the best product possible.
Well, we also talked about, you know, having a conversation with a developer or two to see, in fact, what would incentivize them to come here, you know, to participate in an annexation. You know, what is important to them?
Yes.
I know one of the main things is how long does it take to get something approved here? You know, and maybe as an incentive, part of the process is relaxed.
So I actually think the subdivision code's working on that one, hopefully. I have reached out to developers, made them aware of both this subcommittee and engineers as well, because I think engineers are going to be interested in this. So I've made them aware of the work we're doing here in the city, both here and with the subdivision, because I think these are the two sections that are going to have big impact if something wants to come in. And I know I talked to a developer and they were like, I'm gonna sit back and see what you guys do, and then they were definitely like, I'm gonna stay on top of it. I was like, I'm trying to reach out.
So, long ago, when the first annexation committee ran, there was an analysis that Tom West did of, sort of what the county offered, what constraints there were, and so on. Now, my sense is that the superior design process has evolved, and it might be worth revisiting and maybe spending some time understanding, what is the reality of what the choice is if you go to the county. And maybe we can play off of that. If we want to incentivize and we really want to see everybody come to the city, then I think we need to start by saying, what is it that they get by default, or what options they have if they want to push it further. And obviously that's a big question mark.
So I think the one thing that we are addressing in the subdivision committee is the process. We're kind of streamlining the process a little bit more. We're also bringing council in a lot earlier. So we're looking at that.
But what I'm talking about is the other side of that, which is what are the requirements, the standards?
Definitely, we're going to look at I'll look at the requirements. Also, something that the city all has is the mixture of housing types. In the county, the only way you're getting townhouses or duplexes is with a conditional use. You cannot do that by right. It's just single family. Is that an incentive or not to do townhouses and duplexes?
So I guess one of the questions there is, is it that it all gets to be townhouses, or that it's a mix, that there's no more than X percentage that's one of these kinds of?
So as we've discussed, and what I've heard back is we don't want just all of one. It has to be a mix. And you can have a percentage single family, percentage duplexes, or percentage duplexes, percentage townhouses, but it can't be all just one. It just can't be all duplexes. It can't be all just townhouses. It's a mixture of multiple uses. Housing types is what you guys have been discussing to put into the code.
So at what point do we try to put this all together in a document, as well as a series of illustrations? Something maybe we need to start putting this together. We have a lot of ideas we've been kicking around. It might be time for us to really package that, just so that we understand what we've been talking about, but also so that we might be able to start, let's check in with the Planning Commission and say, here's what we're thinking.
Now,
yeah.
Perfectly fine, because I've been kind of tweaking it as we've kind of gone along. I know we spent a good chunk of time working on the definition of open space. Do you want to do that before you report back to commission, or do you want to take these ideas and float them by commission? I'm just asking questions so I can figure out best path process.
I wish Nancy were here. I think it'd be good to have to work through that open space definition work. I'm disappearing for the month of August. I will not be available. I can tell you right now, I'm not going to be here. If you guys want to continue in my absence, that's fine. But I just think we need, most of what I've been saying here is trying to keep the whole in mind. And I tend to not be very good at focusing on that little standard, because outside of the system within which that standard exists, it's hard to appreciate how that standard supports or detracts from the overall effect.
Okay. How about I look at what the county's rules are versus the cities. I will tweak kind of the stuff we've been doing on this, and then I will send out the open space definitions so you guys have some time to look them over. And then if you want to meet in early September, or if Melanie and Nancy want to meet beforehand, just to start discussing suggestions, or you guys can just take the time, read it, and then just send me comments, and then I can start doing tweaks to everything. So when we get back together next time, we have something a little bit more to move forward with. It's just an idea.
So like I've said at several points today, I'm a visual person. One of the things I'm trying to figure out is how you take all the standards, how you take all the language, and it becomes a map. It becomes a plan. I realize every landowner will read them differently and come up with a different response. But I guess what I'm wondering is, how can we make sure that the words that we're using actually get us what we're imagining? Or do are there unintended consequences of the words?
I think, you say what you want and you wait and see what you get.
Yeah.
I don't see how else you can test it.
Yeah, and again, remember, every piece of land is different. They're not all rectangles.
No, they're not.
So,
That's exactly why I've been saying all these things I've been saying about open space, because there are opportunities that each property presents. There are places that are more valuable to the individuals that may ultimately live there, but there are also places on that property that will be valuable to everybody that's ever gone by that area.
and I think that's where we have to call out, what are those valuable items? We've done wetlands, we're gonna add woodlands, we've got floodplain, the corridor are important, and it's like, we put that in the code and somebody can do it, and they can hit all the marks and still not be exactly what we have in our vision. And it's like, how do we get there? And unfortunately, I don't know of a code that is, gonna be 100% getting to what you want.
Yeah.
Because every place is a little bit different. Every parcel of land is a little bit different. There's always like, somebody can find something to do with it. And then it's like, okay, you learn, like Melanie said, you learn, and then it's like, okay, we need to fix that loophole, but I think, what we're doing is our best and trying to get out there, well, this is what we want, and this is what we believe Lewis should look like, and while still encouraging people to please come to Lewis, because, we kind of want the land use control and we want to encourage that, but we also want to protect. So it's a tough balance, but I think there are ways we can do it.
In the conversation in the major subdivision, in the process, you mentioned the distinction between standards and, I guess you used the word guidelines.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a way of, offering up process, for lack of a better term, shortcuts, if you exceed the requirements by a certain amount? You have a set of standards, and then there's all these other wish list things. You go to that next level, and the process gets simpler. Maybe it's crazy, but like you said, there's process opportunities and there's standards that
you moved maybe to the top of the list for like review, and maybe we can cut down on the review, because I know like I need a certain amount of time to review a plan, depending on what's on my list of items and it's like a page of what I need to get done, but maybe that moves to the top when it comes back in. So like the way I review things, they get reviewed in the order in which they are received, because we're already I think the proposed streamlining of the process, I think is good, and I think it'll speed up the process, hopefully, because it's tweaking different things, but it's also, your expectations are going to have to change as well as we go through the process, but maybe it's review, and like Charlie needs so many days to review for engineering. What if we can cut that down? What if I can't talk about outside agencies because I don't have any control over those, but internal agencies, maybe we can reduce that somehow or do something. But yeah, I think those are good incentives of, hey, please come here. I know we have an extra requirement or two, but we'll give you this.
Why don't we try to get these ideas together in some form and, at least in September, meet with a developer or developers, whoever we can get together with. That's what I would suggest.
I will definitely invite them. I can't guarantee they will come, but
Right.
Well, I suppose one way to get their interest is to share the document, but I mean, obviously that would only be a draft document, something where, it's just a working straw document.
I think it could just be ideas that we talk about.
Yeah.
I don't know that it has to be written
Okay.
at this point.
yeah, I mean, I've
Just
kind of like
concepts.
taken some of the concepts and like thrown them into the code, which, I mean, we can put on, I mean, it's clearly draft. But we can throw that on, because you guys have a webpage, and I try to put everything there. And I can try and do a county versus city, the draft with the ideas, and just like an idea list.
But the thing that I guess I want to make sure of is that we capture the newest iteration of, the new superior design standards as they apply. I mean, as I understand it, that changes the way the things will work in the county, particularly in the clustering.
Yeah, no, I was gonna do a
arrangements.
compare and contrast versus what's required in the city and what's required in the county.
Okay.
I think that's what you were looking
Yep.
for.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep.
All right. I have nothing else. I mean, I think that's the right thing to do.
So I
With the
will.
goal that eventually that becomes the foundation of effectively a presentation we make to planning. And I think a conversation that we need to have with the major subdivision group.
Yeah, I definitely take, like, the good thing is I'm in all of the meetings, so I will take these items and it's like, okay, how do I get these into that, and how do I get those into here? Because I think of me as the bridge,
Yeah.
and I'm connecting all the islands to everybody. So you are not on your own little island. We are working.
I wish
with-
there weren't so many islands. I guess that's one of the problems I'm struggling with.
Yeah, and I think it's just the way the subdivision committee, I mean, 'cause it's turning into a rewrite of the subdivision code, is that the idea just came up, like, how do we, and it's like, oh, we can take some of this and put it there and there over to here. It just organically turned out that way.
Anything else, Melanie?
Well, I'm thinking about the open space and what we want to say about the open space. And I think maybe we should get together with Nancy,
Yeah.
and have maybe next month, early next month sometime, and get that solidified a little better. Because it's kind of mush in my mind right now.
Yeah, I've got some ideas. I couldn't find them. I think I organized too well. So I'm gonna send you guys the draft, what I've come up with, and then you guys can throw me back suggestions and we can discuss and
Okay.
redo them.
Feel free to meet while I'm gone to further refine this. I completely trust you guys to take it and roll with it. I have no problems with that.
Okay, so I'll get that out to you guys and then set up a meeting in August.
Okay.
And then we'll work on a meeting for September, and I will send an invite to a couple developers and see if they.
Do we have any questions or, we've got at least five
it was-
Q&As. Is that all the stuff that was? said
Yeah,
before?
Joe made a comment about Canary Creek and it having a mixture of it being zoned R5 and a mixture of housing types. That's what his comment was.
I mean, the subdivision off
You mean
Park Avenue?
the neighborhood, the neighborhood off of Park Road?
Isn't the Canary Creek development an R5? It is a mix done several years ago, has single-family and townhouses.
I don't know about the R5 part, but I mean, at its most basic level, the way I understand that Canary Creek went down, that's exactly the kind of thing I was talking about. You have a huge parcel of land. They took all the available units they could put in there and they squeezed it in the area you see there that's been developed. And there's a whole piece of ground that hasn't been touched. I'm not saying it has to be so black and white. I think it could be, there could be more mixture, but
I think he was just pointing out
Yeah.
that it's a mix of units.
Yes.
right, no, and I think that's, think that development works. I know that there are people out there who have issues with it, but,
And that's the way,
yeah,
again, like I said, we can't make everybody happy because everybody has a different view and a different opinion, and that is perfect. That is fine. It's trying to find the right balance. Okay, so I've got some homework. I will send it out to you. You guys will have some homework to get back to me, and I'll reach out to you and Nancy for August, and then after that, I'll reach out to everybody for September meeting.
all right, super.
Okay, anything else?
Thank you. Thank you. No, that's good.
All right, and then I'll see you at the Rollins Center in a couple of hours.
Oh, the Rollins Center, okay, great.
Yes,
Thank
that's
you.
why I sent out the other email.
All right.
So where are you off to?
Just wait a minute, because we have not.
My daughter's getting married